Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to the 2020 Justin and Tyler Movie Awards. This is part 2 of our top 30 best movies of 2020. These are picks number 20 through to number 11, and Tyler's going to kick us off this time, which means I will close the video with my number 11, but we will kick off with Tyler's number 20.
Alright, so my number 20 is The Wolf House.
Oh,
It's technically a cheater from like 2 years ago. It's an animated movie. The imagery is beautiful. Sometimes the plot isn't paced like super well. The stop motion animation is gorgeous, and it's kind of shot like even when it transitions from scene to scene, it's almost like a handy cam where the scenes kind of just melt together instead of like a typical transition, at least some of the time. I mean, it's been a little while since I saw it. Yeah, it does a good job of exploring the main character really well with gorgeous imagery. I just don't think that the plot was always paced as well as it could, but man, it's still one of the best movies of the year. It's an awesome, different, dark, animated movie from, a different country.
Yeah.
It's good.
Darn, I wish I would have known that it was stop motion animation, because that's my jam.
Yeah,
I would have prioritized watching it. My number 20 is another movie that I'm going to need my paper for because it stars people with long or difficult names. My number 20 is Residue. So, Residue stars Obina Nwachukwu, I think is how you pronounce the last name, but I'm sure I probably butchered that.
I butcher names all the time in these videos.
Dennis Lindsay, and directed by Marawi Jarima. And it's the story of an aspiring filmmaker who grew up in Washington, moved to Los Angeles, has come back to Washington in order to make a movie about the neighborhood he grew up in, only to come to find that the neighborhood he grew up in obviously is very different than what it was when he was here. So the movie is about the gentrification of the gentrification of black neighborhoods in Washington. So obviously he's a black filmmaker. He comes back, he wants to make a movie about the neighborhood he grew up in, only to find out that the neighborhood he grew up in is now kind of full of white people, and there's very few people that he actually grew up with that are still in the neighborhood. There's a small number of them still around, but he just doesn't recognize this old neighborhood anymore. And look, it's not a topic that immediately resonates with me personally.
Right.
Like, there's a lot of really high artistry in the way this movie is made, and there's pain that's expressed in the way this movie is made and how this movie tells its story that I'll never understand. So it's not a movie that hit a personal resonation with me. Right. However, I acknowledge and I understand this is a really well-made movie. And it's a really interesting movie, and the lead performance, aside from a few moments of hyperbole, when I think the pain that they're talking about here is expressed in such a way that kind of stops being interesting, and now it's melodramatic, and it almost goes a little too far with it. But then again, that's me as an outsider, kind of watching and kind of my perspective on things. But I certainly enjoyed it. I respect this movie maybe a little bit more than I enjoyed it as a piece of art and a piece of entertainment. But it still winds up inside my top 20 for 2020, Residue.
I don't even know if I've heard of it.
Okay.
I feel like I might have, but I'm not sure. So,
I think
basically it means it's a crappy movie.
Right. I think it was just one that showed up. It was listed on Criticker, and I saw that my PSI was high enough that I was like, I wonder what this is.
It wasn't even listed on mine.
No,
but
and
it sounds good.
Yeah, no, genuinely, it was interesting. But like I say, there's a lot of stuff here that I can't understand and won't understand, because it's not a topic that's going to resonate with me personally, but very, very genuinely well made.
So my number 19 is Borat 2.
Oh, wow.
I mean, I know that's not the official name,
right?
Borat 2.
Subsequent movie film.
Yeah.
with a very long subtitle.
I was gonna say, can you tell me the full title?
I can't.
Well, I mean, I don't know that it's quite as good as the first, but strangely, I think it has like a little more heart than the first.
Right.
But I like it. I like Borat. I'm not a big fan of him in general, but I do like his character Borat. And yeah, it was nice to see it back. Nice to see him back. And the girl, I don't remember the girl's real name, but like she was good. She was fun. And
The one that plays his daughter. Yeah.
There was just there's some really good jokes in there. One of my favorite gags is that he'd refer to his daughter as his non-male son. I love that gag. He mentions it a few times. I think it's like non-male son or something like that. Whatever he calls her, because he doesn't just say daughter, he's like, my non-male son.
All right, my number 19 best movie of 2020 is called Premature. And I have a very complicated, not very good relationship with movies named Premature.
I know. I was going to make that observation because you hated one.
Back in 2014, it was one of the worst wastes of film that I think I've ever seen.
I remember.
So, this movie stars Zora Howard and Joshua... being very bad with names here, I guess. Joshua Boone, directed by Rashad Ernesto Green. And it's the story of a 17-year-old poet named Ayana who is traversing teen love in the summer before she goes to college. And again, I got a bad relationship with movies named Premature, but luckily this one overcame that bad relationship, which is good. I no longer have to worry about it. And it's funny, because when I say I have a bad relationship with movies with the title Premature, immediately there's a pornography joke in there to make, but
I made it in my head.
In your head? There you go. Fair enough. I'm sure the viewers as well. I'm not going to say this is the greatest exploration of this topic, because it certainly is not. One part early on in the movie really hooked me. And it's such a tiny little thing. But at one point, the Isaiah character and the Ayana character are walking. And he insists on walking on the outside of the sidewalk.
Oh, yes.
Which is a thing my father taught me years ago. And he would always make the joke of, always walk on the outside when you're walking with a lady, or else someone will come by and steal her. It's just an old joke, right? But there was still there's a chivalry thing in there.
Because if someone's gonna get hit by a car,
exactly, or get splashed by water or whatever, make it be the guy. And when he said that, I was like, all right, I'm kind of here for this. Yeah. Like, this movie's gonna have to work a whole lot harder to make me not like it than to make me like it. The movie does get serious. I think when it's serious, it's fine. Again, it's not fantastic. And I do have a criticism of it where, like, I know the actress is not this age, but, like, the Ayana character is explicitly stated to be 17. There are, like, explicit sex scenes in this movie. Ooh. But with a person who is assumed in the narrative to be 17 years old. So I don't know if that's like a point of discomfort for some people
watching. There's some cognitive dissonance, because she's not actually 17,
she's not.
So it's okay.
Right.
It should be hot, but then like you're supposed to believe that this person is 17 and
it's
you
like,
feel dirty about it.
Am I watching something illegal right now? Even though the actual, because I think Zora Howard's like 21 or something. So it's like, the actress isn't 17. But at the same time, it's like, I feel like I shouldn't be watching this. So there's a little bit of discomfort there too, but the good parts of the movie outweigh that. So Premature is my number 19.
Could be worse. You could be watching Cuties.
This is true. You could be watching that. Black romance is expressed in a different way, culturally. And it's like, okay, I'm probably not going to relate with that quite in the same way, and that's perfectly fine. So maybe there was just that little, sort of absence in communication there too. It was still a good movie. Still wind up on the list.
My number 18 is Palm Spring.
Ooh, okay.
There's a time loop, Groundhog Day, easy comparison there. It's a rather breezy take on the time loop idea, but I was okay with that. What surprised me was how well it explored its themes. I guess I didn't really. It actually made me think about some stuff at the time that other time loop movies have not. And yeah, Sandberg has good chemistry with the woman. I'm sorry, I forgot her name. I only know Sandberg because Sandberg.
Right.
I've also been watching a lot of Lonely Island videos lately.
Oh, there you go.
But yeah, Palm Springs is a really great little breezy time loop movie. Funny, has some heart. You know, it's what I wanted from it.
My number 18 best movie of 2020 is a movie you mentioned earlier. It's The Way Back. Ben Affleck, who did not direct the movie. Jeremy Rubin, directed by Gavin O'Connor. It's the story of Jack struggling with alcoholism and gets the opportunity to go back and coach his, I don't know if it's Christian or Catholic, but it's one of the two, high school basketball teams. And this was the Catholic movie that was not pandering this year.
Yeah.
You, of course, have Assassin 33.
I forgot that it was Catholic at all.
Yeah, there you go. Exactly. And there's interesting side characters in this too, like the school priest or not priest, pastor. He was really interesting. He was a fun character in the movie too. They had good chemistry between Ben Affleck and him. So Ben Affleck, we've had the Ben Affleck conversation multiple times. This is a film driving performance, and obviously the alcoholism elements were not lost on me as I was watching it. And I'm like, okay, this is a very personal performance, clearly. And this is a movie, it's really interesting because it's kind of going to go back to a conversation that we had in an earlier video about tropes. This movie, this is just the sports movie trope.
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
For all intents and purposes, this movie is the Mighty Ducks play Christian basketball. Like, it's the exact same, it's the Mighty Ducks.
But there's no knuckle puck.
But there's no knuckle puck. There's just the one.
So that comparison fails because there's no knuckle puck.
There's just the one kid that finally learns how to shoot a three-pointer. Like that, it's just the sports movie trope. It's a fairly simplistic use, in fact, of the sports movie trope. But like you had mentioned before, and I fully agree with you, sometimes tropes are tropes because they work.
Yeah.
And this is another trope that absolutely works. My only criticism of the movie is I thought the ending was kind of lukewarm. Like, it just ends. Basically just ends. Like, he's in rehab and shooting basketball.
I don't recall that bothering me, but I'd have to, like, look at the ending again.
Yeah, I think I was looking for something just a little bit more satisfying. Not that, oh, everything works out for him in the end. I'm okay with being left on, like, something of a cliffhanger ending. That's perfectly fine. I just kind of thought, I'm kind of lukewarm on that, but it's fine. But no, ultimately, like I say, his performance, I probably should have put it maybe in my honorable mentions for performance. But you know, it was an excellent performance. It's an excellent movie. So The Way Back is number 18.
I like Affleck as an actor,
yeah,
and as a director, even though he didn't direct this. My number 17 is The Gentleman. I like seeing Guy Ritchie do Guy Ritchie. This is a good example of what happens when you have good writing with a talented cast, because they're all just like charming.
Absolutely.
Get along real well together. I want to give special attention. I may have mentioned this before, but I like the musical choices. Like they play "Oh Shit" by The Far Side at one point.
Yes.
And I really loved how they implemented that song into the scene in particular. That's the one that really sticks out. But yeah, just anytime Richie is doing good, I'm there.
Yeah.
Because he's stylish and fun, and I like seeing him return to this particular format.
Yeah. My number 17, best movie of 2020 is one that I've mentioned a couple times before, so it'll be relatively quick. Bad Education. Hugh Jackman, Allison Janney, directed by Corey Finley. It's a dramatization of the largest public school embezzlement in U.S. history. And again, it's driven by the two performances of Hugh Jackman and Allison Janney for sure. What I kind of really dug about it, even though it does take a little while maybe to get into it, a little while for it to get going, the early parts of the movie are kind of dense to get through, and you're just kind of sitting there like, I'm waiting for the thing to happen, because all I'm seeing so far is like world's best principal. like he's just the world's best principal at this point. Like he's awesome and seems to do no wrong, and then it's like it very slowly it's like, okay, there's a thing. Okay, now it's kind of starting to cascade a little bit. And once it starts to cascade, the movie definitely gets better. The periodic tinges of black comedy throughout the movie were definitely helpful. And every time you'd kind of get that sort of understated comedic line, I found I popped at it a little bit more. And for me, there's something timeless about the concept of the villain that doesn't think they're the villain ultimately getting their comeuppance. Because he very much, throughout almost the entirety of this movie, does not look at himself as the villain.
Right.
Even though they're literally embezzling millions of dollars from the school. At no point does he look at himself as the villain. And so when he finally kind of gets his comeuppance, there's that satisfaction there. And again, as more things kind of fall apart for the Frank character, Jackman just keeps turning things up and keeps turning his performance up and just kept being more and more and more entertaining. So this winds up being a pretty strong landing on this list.
Yeah, it didn't end up being on my list. I can't remember if I did honorable mention or not, but I did really enjoy it. The director, Corey Finley, did Thoroughbreds.
Yes.
Either last year or the year before, I can't remember. But he wrote Thoroughbreds where he didn't write this one. My criticism of Thoroughbreds was I don't think it was actually written amazingly well, and I think that Bad Education was. So maybe Finley should probably stick to just directing. My number 16 is Soul. I agree that this is a great movie, for sure. It's a good topic. It's funny. It's got heart like Pixar. You know, it always has that part that's devastating.
Yes.
It has great animation. So, it's that Pixar style, you know, that they just do. I don't know that it's quite as good as a lot of people think, though, because even though the animation itself is great, the artistic design of it, of like the afterlife, or it's not really called afterlife, it's like the great beyond or whatever, like that whole area, and the great before, I think it was called.
Yes.
Not that inspired.
No,
Like
it's
kind of
clouds.
disappointing.
Yeah.
Yeah, like that is really disappointing. Now when they go back into the real world and stuff, and it has that typical Pixar, you know, whatever, I thought it was really good. And once the main character meets whatever the little
22.
Yeah, and then it becomes really funny. And there's like a gag with like pizza and stuff.
Yeah.
And I actually like turned it back and rewatched it right
Oh,
away,
nice.
because I thought that was like I laughed really hard at it. But yeah, what put it down was looking at the Great Before, Great Beyond, or whatever. I was just like, wow, for such a creative studio, and like it's co-directed, but I'm more familiar with Pete Docter than the guy who co-directed it. But like, for so much talent involved, I thought, really, you guys couldn't come up with something a little more inspiring? But besides that, it's a great Pixar movie. To me, it doesn't like sniff the crotch of like the truly great, like the Toy Story, you know, Up and WALL-E,
Right.
Coco, right? It doesn't sniff those to me. So maybe second tier Pixar,
Right.
I guess, which is not at all a bad place to be.
I feel like this movie, in terms of like the facial expressions and the visual effects that they use, and just the quality of the animation, it felt like a significant step forward for Pixar, which feels like how can you continue taking significant steps forward? And maybe it's just because like this movie, obviously the setting of it and everything is different, but especially when they're in the real world.
In the real world, I agree with you.
God, it looks so incredible.
Right. But my problem is when they're not in the real world, and I'm looking at this, I'm like, are these the same movies?
Right.
And I know that it's a deliberate artistic choice, but it didn't work.
Right.
So, but yeah, besides that, yeah, I agree. The facial expressions and all that. It's just a little jarring when you have like something that's so great over here.
Yeah.
And you're like looking at this and you're like, you guys could have done anything with this.
Right.
And this is what you did?
Right.
Like, you're Pixar.
Right, I'm going to fly through number 16 because I've literally already said everything about it that I intended to say. My number 16 is The Vast of Night. Sierra McCormick and, who's the other actor's name? Jake Horowitz, directed by Andrew Patterson. It's these two youths trying to find the source of a mysterious radio frequency. Again, I would love this as a podcast or a radio drama, just because of the auditory beats on it. I thought it was shot in an interesting way, even though, like we said, kind of the Twilight Zone gimmick doesn't really pay off to anything. It's just like, it's an interesting stylistic choice why you would choose to do it that way, which I guess fits the 50s setting, because it's, set in the 50s. So again, interesting sci-fi, visually interesting, and that makes it all the more interesting when they decide to take the visuals away and force you to only focus on the auditory elements of it, which I thought was almost bordering on a brilliant artistic choice. So Vast of Night winds up number 16, very high on my list.
I was kind of thinking while you were talking, because why would I listen to you, about how, like, I'm in love with that premise, because the premise of, like, something weird going on the radio at night, it takes place pretty much at night, right?
Yep.
That creeps me out.
Yeah.
Partially because I have an experience of, like, hearing weird sounds at night from my computer, which I won't get into, but, like, that premise creeps me out. And I love that premise. And then I was just here thinking about it while you were talking, and I was listening to you, of course, but I was like, I really like this movie. I gave it an 8 out of 10, but it was just an honorable mention. But then I was thinking, it's part of the reason why maybe I wasn't quite as high on it, because, like, I expect so much from that premise.
Maybe so.
That premise hits me so hard.
Yeah.
That I'm like, it's kind of like I love, like, dystopias, but I find I don't always love dystopian movies or books, because I'm like, I expect so much from, like, a dystopian premise. Can you find that sometimes with things you really like that you're almost harder on it?
Yeah.
My number 15 is The Hunt. Yes, I like The Hunt more than Pixar.
Wow. Interesting. Okay.
But
this doesn't come as a great shock, but I guess a little bit, like you said, considering which one came before.
It's just funny the placing of it.
Yeah, for sure.
It just comes down to, as I mentioned in a previous video, I think the commentary is smart, but as a documentary, they could have went in more depth. But even as just a movie, just like a thrill ride of these people, specifically the one woman, who I thought put in the main girl actually put in a good performance. I consider her because for an award just because I thought she was so fun. But just a person who like wakes up or whatever is just like, where am I? What's going on? It's like, okay, I'm gonna murder these people.
Right.
It works for me. It's just like a pure, like, you would take all social commentary out of it, which is almost impossible with this movie,
right?
Because it's so blatant. But you could take all that out, it would still work for me. It's just like a movie, just as an action horror tinge type movie. So I really like The Hunt. I know you don't love The Hunt, but I like The Hunt, so I'm gonna hunt you.
There you go. No, but like I said, when I talked about it, like with the over the top sort of survival fantasy elements of it, those were entertaining. Yeah, like just surface level entertaining to me. Yeah, absolutely. We just had a moment off camera, but don't worry about it. My number 15 best movie of 2020 is Rewind. So yeah, see, that's why
it's not the movie. It's the off-topic or off-camera conversation followed by this that made me laugh.
Don't worry,
the subject matter is very serious. It's not funny in the least.
It's just us being idiots. So the only person I'm going to mention, basically, in the making of this movie is Sasha Joseph Newlinger, who is the focal point of the movie. And of course, this is, like, again, a documentary that revealed generations of sexual abuse within this person's specific family. And like we talked about, this is a good documentary to me. To me, it's not a great documentary. I've been more invested in other documentaries because it didn't feel so blatant that I was being, like, kind of led in a particular direction, or I was being even, like, I could go as far as to say being emotionally manipulated in a certain direction. And I made the point when I talked about it before, like, every documentary is emotionally manipulative. Right. Every documentary is leading you or wants to lead you towards a particular conclusion. Like, I remember having an argument with somebody about, like, Jesus Camp. Somebody like, I really liked Jesus Camp, and they're like, well, Jesus Camp isn't trying to say this, and this, and I'm like, yes, it is. It's explicitly.
Is that the one with Pepsi in it?
I think so.
We watched that together years ago.
We did, and it's like, no, it's explicitly trying to say these things, but and like that's not even necessarily a criticism, but the best documentaries that I've ever watched don't make it blatant that they're leading you in a particular direction. And of course, like, this one ends off with, a very imperfect form of justice, and I think it almost serves as much as a call to action on the cracks in the legal system as it does just like, you know, explosive revelatory narrative about this particular family. So look, this serves its purpose, and it is where it is, and I certainly didn't dislike it, or it would not be on this list. So it's my number 15 movie of the year. I will say in this block of movies, we've now entered like 8 out of 10 territory for me. This was my lowest 8 out of 10.
Yeah, fair enough.
Right?
Yeah, the subject matter is so personal and strong and important that it should be so easy to make a great documentary, and yet as like a movie, it's kind of just like it's like everything you said, and that's really a shame.
Yeah.
But yeah.
I think it almost would have worked better as a short doc.
Yeah.
Right?
Probably.
Rather than a full-length documentary.
Well, there's parts where like they're talking and stuff, and it feels so forced. Like, you don't need this part in here. Like, we get that like the family was abusive, and that stands on its own.
Yeah.
My number 14 is Sound of Metal. As far as I'm concerned, there's 2 stars here. I mean, the story is good enough, but the 2 stars are Riz Ahmed, or you said Riz Ahmed or something.
Yeah.
I don't know how it's pronounced, apparently. Him, the main actor, and the sound design. The sound design, because he's deaf, it's brilliant. So like when you don't hear dialogue, it's like, well, it makes sense, right? So I actually loved the sound design so much so that Christopher Nolan, I'm never gonna let this go. He should just learn something from these guys, like from who made Sound of Metal, because the sound design is the most, I would probably say, the most inspired sound design of the year, without remembering what the rest of my list is, but I can't see anything from just a purely sound design perspective beating it. So yeah, those are the 2 stars, but it's a good story anyway. It's emotional.
Yeah.
He got the best actor of the year from me, and mostly because of this role. Yeah, this movie got a lot of love. It deserves it. Maybe I don't love it as much as some people, I guess, since it's only like 14, but I did really love it, because at this point I'm at my 85s.
Right.
So
my number 14 best movie of 2020 is Wonder Woman 1984. Gal Gadot, Kristen Wiig, directed by Patty Jenkins. I'm pretty sure I pronounced it Gadot, and I meant to pronounce it Godot, but you know.
Well, the thing is, I thought it was Godot, but then I hear Gadot, so I do Gadot now, even though Godot sounds better.
It's Godot, yeah, Godot sounds more normal to me, but you all know who I'm talking about.
She's very good looking.
Exactly. So, and this is the Wonder Woman character now in the mid-80s, facing off with Max Lord, the Cheetah, as well as, I guess, the tertiary villain would be the consequences of getting the one thing that you want most in life. So I really enjoyed the ultra cheesy, like, 80s as remembered 4 decades later elements that were shown in this movie. It's like, it's a 2020 representation of the 80s, and I'm like, I don't think this was quite accurate, but it is entertaining and I enjoy it. So I did definitely enjoy that element. I thought Gal and Kristen Wiig played actually pretty well off of each other. I thought there was quite a bit of chemistry there.
Yeah.
And I mean, of course, Gal, we've gushed about her before, that she's literally everything about this character that we could possibly want. I think there were some elements of the writing / production / performance that probably could have been improved a bit. But there's something weird to me about DC movie special effects, and maybe it's because we're so spoiled because of Marvel and like the Star Wars movies and other sci-fi movies with incredible special effects. So maybe like it's the wire work on Wonder Woman. Like it looks so stiff.
There are some moments.
There's just certain moments where it's just like, oh man, does that look terrible. But for the most part, that stuff is fine. But there are just those couple of moments that then stand out like a sore thumb. That's just like, oh god, I wish they would have taken a little more time to clean that up a little bit more. But look, it's Wonder Woman. Keep giving me Wonder Woman. I hope Gal stays in this lane as long as she possibly can.
Well, they already fast-tracked. They're fast-tracking a third one.
Yeah, so make as many of these movies as possible, because I'll keep coming back to them every time. So, yeah. Wonder Woman 1984, my number 14.
Did you know that it just fell to a rotten status on Rotten Tomatoes?
Really?
Which I thought was 50%, but it's actually 60, which makes me hate the tomato meter even more because 60 makes no sense to me. So my lucky number 13 is Extraction. I don't know what to say besides just I'll repeat my point from an earlier video. Didn't expect the action to be like a lesser John Wick, but a lesser John Wick is still really good.
Yeah.
It's not as good as John Wick, but I love watching Hemsworth have some really inspired fight scenes. So that's it. It's just a really good, really, really good action movie.
Yeah. And again, like, it was one that I looked at that I was just like, and I made the point, I was like, this looks like Black Hawk Down to me, and if I'm going to watch Black Hawk Down, I'm just going to watch Black Hawk Down. Right. But very clearly, I think this movie was one that I underestimated and probably should have taken the time to watch. I had it, could have watched it, didn't watch it. So probably should have taken the time to do that because clearly it was something that subverted my expectations.
Yeah, I really liked it.
Yeah. My lucky number 13 will be a quickie here once again. Movie I've already talked about. Movie he's already talked about. 1917, directed by Sam Mendes. And I just want to grab the actors' names here, right? Well, I mean, it's got Colin Firth in it. It's got Mark Strong in it. It's got Benedict Cumberbatch in it. So it's an understated little ensemble cast. And I certainly didn't expect Benedict Cumberbatch to be in the movie. I didn't know that going in, and then he shows up in the one scene. I'm like, hey, I know that guy. It's that guy whose name 90% of people can't pronounce or intentionally pronounce incorrectly for laughs. So yeah, basically this is a story of two military privates in World War I who are racing to get a message to the front lines to avoid, I think, a 1,600 person troop basically being completely obliterated during World War I because they're walking into a trap. I talked about it before, how like I love this for how it was made, like this, you know, the gimmicks to make it look like two long continuous shots, and for what it was, which was, again, like I had mentioned to you in one of the previous videos, a love letter to the stories that Sam Mendes' grandfather used to tell him about his experiences in the First World War. And I really like the point that you made when you talked about it, about the way it's shot and the way it's put together allows for these big action set pieces, but then also doesn't smother the smaller, the smaller moments. It allows the bigger stuff to breathe.
Like there's a part where maybe there's many parts, but there's one part in particular, I don't know if it's early on, where they're walking through the trenches.
Yeah.
And it just felt like a little scary, but a little, I don't know, it's just, the way it was shot just really made just walking through the trenches seem more meaningful than, like, because we've seen that in so many movies that people just walk through trenches.
Right.
But in this, it just felt different.
And I think that is relatively early in the movie, because I think I know the specific sort of sequence, that you're talking about. And what I think kind of helps this movie stand out and wind up very high, sort of in this block of movies, is like I could put this movie here or better.
Yeah.
In any of the last at least 3 years, if not more. So that's how much I did wind up enjoying this, even relative to its contemporaries kind of in this rating area. So 1917, that's where it lands for me this year.
My number 12 is Let Him Go. Now, I actually knew nothing about this movie. Like, I saw the title and I saw Costner and Lane on it. I was like, oh, is this a romance movie?
Yeah,
or something, right? I was like, I don't really need to see it. Then, like, I actually knew what the premise was, and I was like, oh, they're trying to, like, basically save their,
It would be their grandson.
Yeah. And I watched it, and I got so invested in them, and I actually thought there was quite a few little really tense scenes, and Costner and Lane were both great. Now their characters are quite a bit different. Costner was kind of like the retired cop, you know, he had that level of, like, you know. Anyway, they were both really, really good. Lane was I actually considered in my best actress. But yeah, I ended up enjoying this movie a lot more than I expected. I thought it would maybe be like a 7 out of 10 or something, but I ended up giving it an 8.5.
My number 12 best movie of 2020 is Driveways. It's a movie that I've talked about before. Brian Dennehy, there you go. Brian Dennehy, Hong Chow, and directed by Andrew Ahn. And I actually have to make a correction from when I talked about this in some videos yesterday. I think I made the point where I was like, oh my god, I really wish Brian Dennehy worked more. Brian Dennehy died in April. So that's just an indication of how long this year has been. I did not know.
That's sad.
That Brian Dennehy passed away, unfortunately. So that's a correction I unfortunately have a duty to make. He was phenomenal. He was so good in that movie. And it was, again, it's understated. It's an understated type of movie because it's literally just a drama about a mother and her son going to clean out her sister's old house, and they just happen to run into the ex-military senior citizen retiree who lives next door, but the really is anchored by these really solid performances across the board. The dramatic beats are great. They're like deep belly laughs of good comedy, which I wouldn't have expected from a movie that is, again, primarily a drama and not advertised as a comedy in any way. But there's just some moments where it's just like, wow, that was one of the hardest laughs I've had all year. And I was not expecting it in the least. I desperately want to see more from Andrew Ahn. I can't wait to see what Andrew Ahn does next. So I kind of had to make that correction on Brian Dennehy from a previous video. And Tyler's at least slightly disappointed because this was his pick.
Yeah, that's why
for me to go number one.
Would be.
Yeah, but Driveways, my number 12 best movie of 2020.
I wasn't even that close. My number 11 is Apples. It's about a pandemic that causes like sudden amnesia. So it's basically just about this guy who suffers amnesia and just he's just a lost soul wandering. I gave the main guy, I'm not going to bother looking up his name, best actor, honorable mention.
Oh, yeah, okay.
He just kind of plays someone kind of adrift, and I don't know, it's just one of those subtle movies that kind of messes you up a little as it goes on, because it's really sad, that they get amnesia and he's having such a hard time. Just they put these people through programs to try to help them, but I don't know, it's just, that would suck.
Yeah.
A pandemic hits that, pandemics are bad anyway, but
spoilers.
Yeah. But one that just makes you an amnesiac, it's that's sad.
And as has happened a few times in this video, I have to once again refer to my paper for people with long names. My number 11, best movie of 2020, and this is the pick that will end this video, is Uncorked. And that's another one of the ones that you hadn't, I think, either hadn't even heard of or had only heard of because I had mentioned it or whatever. Starring Mamadou Afi, Courtney B. Vance, and directed by Prentice Penny. So again, it's the story of Elijah, and Elijah is trying to kind of balance his dreams to become a professional wine sommelier, a master wine sommelier, with the expectations of his family, who are deeply ingrained in southern black barbecue culture. And again, I love the way the movie juxtaposes those two, contrasts those two, combines those two cultures. I'm like, this doesn't feel like two cultures that should go together, wine culture and southern hip-hop barbecue culture, but they absolutely do. And it's funny, there's a really nice touch in this movie where a group of them go to France while he's going through sommelier school. So they go to France, and when they're in France, the soundtrack is French hip hop. Yeah. So it's just it's such a nice touch where it's just it's not like they're in France and they're playing what's clearly American hip hop. No, they're playing French hip hop. This is why representation in art matters, and matters a little bit more, because this is a concept we've seen before. Yeah. We've seen you have this person from this culture and this element of this culture, and the family is deeply ingrained in this, and oh my God, how are they ever going to whatever? We've seen that concept dozens of times. But we've never really seen it with this particular combination. And it's kind of why representation in art matters. You've never seen the combination of wine culture, which is considered white, very upper class, whatever. Never seen that combination with southern, down and dirty barbecue hip hop culture. You've never really seen those two that be combined before. So it's kind of why I think representation matters a little bit more in art. But that's my number 11, Uncorked.
I have nothing to add to this. So wrap up the video, Justin.
There we go. That is the second part of our top 30 best movies of 2020. Picks number 20 through number 11. And just around the corner, the final installment, which is our top 10 movies of 2020. Picks number 10 all the way up to number 1. Thank you so much for watching, and we will see you again in a minute for the top 10.